Hello and welcome to this special edition of BSG webinars. It's Humulus U. I am Dan Carney, Graphic Design Manager at BSG, coming to you from my home office in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Thanks for joining us. This is our 15th episode and our very first Humulus U episode. Normally we would hold a one-day hop symposium in Yakima, Washington, but as everyone knows, we all have to take a break from getting together. So we decided we wanted to bring Humulus U to wherever you are. Before I introduce today's guest, Jessica, I'd like to remind everyone to register for the other Humulus U webinars. This Thursday, we'll be joined by Peter Hoey of Urban Roots Brewing and Smokehouse, Vinny Trelurzo of Russian River Brewing Company, Henry Wynn of Monkish Brewing Company, Evan Price of Green Cheek Beer Co., and Tim Shawshaw of Cellar Maker Brewing Co. So they'll be on for a brewers panel discussion on the subject of hops. So imagine that. Then next Tuesday, we'll have an in-depth session on hop sensory with Emily DeBell, sensory scientist and raw materials specialist at the RAR Technical Center. And she'll be joined by Wayne Scheck, the Director of Strategic Marketing here at BSG. Then on the following Friday, we'll be talking about biotransformation and hop flavor with Patty Aaron, our Manager of Research and Innovation at the RAR Technical Center. So we'll also continue to do webinars in the future. So please join us by registering at bsgcraft.com/webinars, or you can just go directly to bsgcraftbrewing.com and click on our tile on the homepage. So for this webinar, we ask that throughout you please ask questions in the Q&A function. It's the center of the toolbar normally. After the presentation, we'll open it up for questions. So now I'd like to welcome today's speaker, Jessica Reel. Jessica is a fourth generation hop grower who wears many hats at the farm. Today, Jessica will be presenting the 2020 U.S. Hop Crop Report focused on the Yakima growing region. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jessica. Welcome, Jessica.
Hello, thank you for having me. So my name is Jessica Reel. I'm a fourth generation hop grower, and today I'll be discussing the U.S. hop crop so far with all of you. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. We'll break up today's discussion into a few separate areas, beginning with a short introduction of my family's farm. Then, of course, we'll spend time talking about the 2020 crop. And I'd also like to spend some time talking about 2021 and beyond. It's uncertain these days, and we have a lot of decisions before we can move into our next crop year. So my family's farm has been around since 1945. My great-grandfather, William Reel, founded Double R Hop Ranches at our current location here in Harrow, Washington. Currently, the owners and operators are myself, my father, Kevin, my uncle, Keith, their cousin and my cousin, Steve, and my cousin, a fellow fourth-generation farmer, Zachary. Currently on the farm, we grow 1,100 acres of hops, and this year we have 15 different varieties, and I think that's a record for us. As you can see, the varieties are listed here, and those that are in bold green text will be available from BSG for this crop year. In addition to hops, we also grow a few hundred acres of Concord grapes as well. For 2020, the new varieties on our farm are Idaho 7 and Comet. We actually just finished harvesting Comet the last couple of days, and I think that might be my new favorite aroma in the kiln. So before we talk about this year's crop, I wanted to share with you all how the weather has been in the Yakima Valley this year. The green bar is showing you what 2019 weather was. The blue bar is Yakima Valley's average temperature. And in orange, you'll see this year's weather. So early in the season, we actually had pretty mild temperatures. If anything, a little bit cooler than we would usually expect. But as we reached late July and early August, we did see the normal warmer weather arriving, although it also included a few days that tipped over 100 degrees. And those can actually be a bit challenging for baby hops and some of the more delicate aroma varieties. But overall, the weather was good and that has led to this year's crop. If you had asked me a couple of months ago what my predictions were for the crop, I would have guessed that it would be average to maybe even over average. 2019 was an excellent crop year. We had great yield, exceptional quality, but we have faced some challenges this year, just like everyone else. In addition to the coronavirus pandemic, we also faced a few different weather challenges. So at this point in time, with what has been harvested so far, I would rate this year's crop average to maybe even a little below average. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some great babies out there. There are some good quality, high yielding yards. But in general, average is what we can expect for the 2020 crop. In addition to some warm temperatures in August and towards the beginning of harvest, we also had a pretty severe wind event that came through the Pacific Northwest. This was early September, and it impacted just about every growing region, including Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. The winds were a bit unusual. They came in from the northeast, and in some areas were blowing harder than 50 miles per hour. We're very fortunate that this windstorm was not accompanied with rain that would have put extra weight on trellis. So overall, trellis is still in good shape, but we do have more vines that fell down than we would typically see by this point in harvest. So for varieties that were near harvest, we do have farms adding additional labor to pick up those vines and harvest those that can be salvaged that are still in good shape. We also have crews that are concentrating on moving those vines to areas in fields where they won't be driven on or damaged later if we get to them towards the end of harvest. In addition to the wind, we also did see some late season mite pressure. This isn't something that was an impact on every farm at the same level, but both the wind and the mite pressure is going to impact the crop quality in terms of appearance. In most cases, the lupulin inside of the cones is preserved and still a very good quality. You just may see a few more colored cones than you would typically like. And it's possible that some of our vines that had a lot of wind damage are going to continuously dry out and mature a bit sooner than we would like. So I have heard that in some cases, there are fields being harvested out of typical harvest windows so that we can try to preserve what we have there and still have a good quality crop for everyone. And if that wasn't enough, as I'm sure everyone has heard, the Pacific Northwest is dealing with pretty significant wildfires and resulting smoke. This is impacting us on a daily basis as we harvest. It's reducing visibility, and it's obviously not very comfortable to spend our days in while we're picking hops. But we have had similar smoke and fire events 2 and even 3 crop seasons ago, and there were no changes in terms of aroma or any negative impact on quality in those crop years. So at this point in time, we are not expecting for the smoke to have any negative impacts on aroma. Now, before we got to harvest, we did have other challenges early in the year, just like the rest of you. COVID-19, it became apparent that it was going to become a pandemic and affect us all early enough in the season that in some cases and for some varieties, we proactively made some immediate acreage reductions. So hopefully what we're producing this year will continue to match what is in demand for the next brewing season. We also had to spend quite a bit of time focusing on keeping our employees healthy and safe as we continued work. Farming and agriculture in general is an essential industry, so we continued through all of the initial concerns this year with coronavirus, taking extra care to clean our facilities and train our employees and provide the necessary PPE. Now, the regulations and rules that we were all adhering to were a bit different depending on the state that we resided in. For instance, we had some differences from how Washington and how Idaho approached the coronavirus pandemic. So for those of us who wear an HR hat within our farming organizations, we had to spend a lot of additional time early this season to make sure we were aware of the regulation changes as they came out and adapt to those changes. Overall, I feel as though the hop industry did a very good job protecting our employees and continuing normal operations with all of these additional struggles. Now, I have one other thing I'd like to bring up with everybody. This is something I discussed at last year's Humulus U presentation, but I wanted to make sure people are aware of continued concerns with virus and viroid issues with the Cascade variety. Cascade has been a pretty key hop variety for brewers for many years, and it continues to be available on many hop farms throughout the Pacific Northwest. Here in the Yakima Valley, we've started to see continuous trends of impact of virus and viroid in the fields. This reduces our yield, it can reduce quality, and it's something that we see popping up more so than it did 5 years ago. On my farm, for example, about 5 years ago now, we pulled out an original Cascade field, replanted it with virus-free rootstock, harvested a baby crop that was very nice, a second year crop that was pretty good as well, but unfortunately by crop year 3 and very obviously in crop year 4, all of those viruses had returned and again were impacting our yield. So this is one variety that I would recommend if you have the intention of using it. Make sure you're communicating that to your merchant or your sales rep, because there are still some very healthy, viable Cascade yards in the Yakima Valley, and we want to make sure we preserve those. Hopefully we'll discover something that helps us sustain this variety long term. So I feel like that's enough doom and gloom for one presentation. I do want to say that the hop industry and all of your growers are still optimistic about 2021 and beyond. I think everybody's ready for a fresh start. So anything that we were doing prior to the coronavirus pandemic, we're going to continue with, especially if it relates to investing in new harvest facilities or voluntary food safety and sustainability certifications. Here on my farm, we just completed our 6th annual Global Gap audit. We really like that program because it helps us make sure that we're constantly improving our practices for food safety, farming sustainability, and worker welfare. Of course, the other thing we're starting to think about already is what variety and acreage changes need to occur to match brewer demand for 2021 and beyond. Now, we're seeing that that might be a little bit more difficult than usual. Typically, towards the end of hop harvest, there's a lot of chatter about which varieties are in demand, which need to be planted to meet demand, all those sorts of things that we need to know in order to approach our next crop year. Obviously, everybody feels a lot of uncertainty right now, whether you're a brewer or a merchant or a grower. It's very hard to say how much beer needs to be brewed next year, and as a result, how many hops need to be grown and which varieties should be grown. So we want to make sure that to the best of our ability, we're all communicating and giving each other feedback. That's going to ensure our greatest chances of having a good match for product in the market. We've probably never been as unsure about next steps as we are right now. So let's continue that communication with your sales reps, merchants, and growers. And with that, we can move into some Q&A.
All right. Well, thanks, Jessica. I will just...
You're welcome.
All right. So I have a couple questions before we get into the Q&A.
Sure.
But first I'd like to encourage folks to send their questions in now. I know we'll have a couple. But first I wanted to ask you, so what's Yakima like without brewers, taking over the town? What's the vibe right now?
The vibe is not the fun atmosphere that it usually is. We have our heads down, we're getting harvest done, but we are missing that enthusiasm, especially as we're in this halfway point of harvest and starting to get tired and feeling the effects of all of these days of working together so much. So I'd say we're missing all of you, and we sure hope that we can see everybody again next year.
I know I'm missing it. Um, yeah, it's always a highlight of the year going out there. Um, I mean, when you have brewers there, you obviously get that FaceTime. Is there, you know, feedback and things like that must be pretty important year after year, especially how brewing trends change. I mean, is that something you guys are a little worried about, or do you need more feedback? What helps you guys each year to keep fulfilling what brewers want, I guess is
Oh,
what.
feedback is so critical to how we make decisions at the farm level about what we'll be planting. Obviously, a key factor there is making sure that the varieties that we plant fit a specific picking schedule so we can pick everything at peak quality. But we also want to make sure we're picking varieties and growing varieties that the brewers want and need.
Yeah.
Now we get a lot of this feedback from BSG and other merchants, and we do have relationships with brewers, and we'll ask here and there. But I get a lot of great information when I have brewers out to the farm for farm tours, and we can talk about the current crop, look at the crop. That feedback is so valuable for us to know that we're making a good decision when we go to plant a new variety or potentially take one out.
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's the same with us. I mean, at least we still have that contact with brewers, but you guys have more of that FaceTime just in this month, so it's very critical. So we'll be happy to pass along any information we get to you guys as well. Um, something else I wanted to ask you was, this year obviously is one we'll never forget, but since you're fourth generation, there's got to be some fond memories of growing up just on a hop farm and things you've experienced in the past as well. So, what are some of those, I guess?
Yeah, I grew up on the farm, lived out here all through grade school, high school, and I always thought of hop harvest and back to school as kind of being one and the same. I remember walking down to catch the bus and, smelling hop harvest, and at that time, sometimes also having apple harvest occurring here on our farm. But it was always, at least in my mind, a fun time of year because I got to go down and see all these piles of hops and see my grandparents and hear my Uncle Leonard crack some kind of joke that would put a smile on everybody's face. So yeah, it was a great experience growing up on the farm and fond memories, and that's part of I think what's getting all of us through this year.
Yep. No, absolutely. Um, so I guess to kind of finish this off before we get to the Q&A, a lot of hops have a big influence on beer. So what kind of, trends in brewing are you most excited about coming up, that you guys will knowingly influence, I guess, in the future?
Well, there's always excitement about new varieties, and it's fun for us to try growing new hops. But one of the things that I think is the most interesting these days is the connection from the grower to the consumer. It's fascinating, I think, that consumers are acknowledging different varieties of hops and in some instances seeking out different beers to try that use that common hop. So I guess the most excitement for me is really around the storytelling that is now going on within the industry. And it's, again, a lot of these brewer relationships and the feedback that we're getting that can help drive all of that. So I hope all of that continues, even during this time where we're not seeing each other as much face to face.
Right. No, it is important. So we'll definitely push those questions and responses along. So so now let's get to some of the Q&A. We have quite a few questions that have come through, so this is nice to see. Someone said that you mentioned the Comet variety might be your favorite variety this year. Can you tell us a little bit more about that hop?
Yes. So prior to this new variety in the kiln, my favorite day every harvest was usually when we would start picking either Sriracha Ace and then go to Citra, or Citra to Sriracha Ace, just because those were both very interesting, bright aromas. Well, now we have Comet that also fits into this similar picking window. And we had finished up with some Mosaic and started picking Comet, and there was a significant grapefruit note that I noticed as soon as we turned the fans on in the kiln, very pronounced. And it was interesting for me too, because the Comet cone is structurally so different than a lot of those other newer aroma varieties. So just something fun, different, and a new smell in the kiln that helps us all enjoy harvest as the time goes by.
Breaks up some of that monotony, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not all CTZ all day, every day, for instance.
That's funny because we had a good question that said, why did you decide to start growing Comet? Request for any particular breweries?
That's a great question. So we actually are growing most of our Comet for BSG. We had acreage of a different variety last year that we felt just wasn't the right fit for our picking window and for continued demand that came out. So we had acreage available, and we felt confident that we had the capacity to add something that was more in the middle of the picking schedule, since now we have some nice new kiln facilities with extra space. And so we spent time discussing with BSG what some options might be, and they had heard from brewers that Comet was something everyone was kind of getting interested in, and with it being a public variety, it's a hop that can be marketed through all sorts of channels and to all sorts of brewers. So we wanted to give it a try.
Well, excellent. So I have another question. With this past several months of unusual circumstances, are you seeing a trend toward increase in demand of other classic hop varieties besides Cascade, which you spoke about?
You know, I feel like it's too early for me at the farm level to have a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really why I ended on that note of encouraging a lot of communication, because normally even towards the start of harvest, we start having these discussions about what varieties are doing really well, what we might consider trying to add to our crop rotation for the next year. And I feel like everyone right now is so uncertain that we can't proceed and make any decisions just yet. So we're hoping that maybe over the course of the next month or so, a lot of that, typical marketing communication can occur, so that we do get that feedback we need to know what needs to be planted or not.
To add to that, what's the kind of timeline that you guys need some of that feedback back? So, because obviously you can't just start planting right as it's time to start planting, so you need that way ahead of time.
I'm glad you asked that. We obviously work quite hard to get through harvest, and it's a lot of hours, but we take a little bit of time off, and then we are back in the fields normally early October, beginning to lift roots if we're planning to replace it with a new variety the following year. So at a minimum, we need to know if we're not going to grow something for the following year. Basically right now, we kind of need to know if something's not going to be needed. Now, if there are, if there's interest in us replacing it with something new, we also need to know that fairly early as well, because we, again, either need to put in new trellis or remove old rootstock. We like to do that and have it finished by the end of November. That way we can do a very nice job of cleaning up the fields to ensure that there's not going to be, different varieties mixed the following season. Hops are an incredibly persistent perennial, not too, dissimilar from like how blackberry bushes grow in the wild. If you leave a little bit of root out in the field, it will return again. So if we can do that in the fall, it helps us plant a good, clean crop the following late February, early March. And we really don't want to have to wait until February or March to make decisions about what's going to be planted or not.
No, that's excellent. That's something that we, try to emphasize and pass along to customers as well, as getting some of that feedback early in the actual harvest season, so that next year it's more of a planning effort versus a guessing effort for you guys. So so somebody said that I love Idaho 7 hops. How long have you guys been growing that variety at Double R, and how is that variety looking this year?
So this is our first year growing Idaho 7. It's probably hard to tell, but this field right behind me is an Idaho 7 field. So far so good, we really like it. It is a variety that grows a little bit lower to the ground. It gets more of a belly crop. Not every vine reaches over the top of the trellis. So with all those windstorms that we had, we did see some of those that fell, that we've gone through the field and set aside to make sure that they're still in good shape when we go to pick those in the next week or so. But we're really excited about seeing what our baby yields look like, because the vines are pretty full for a baby.
Well, that's good. So do taller, more, balanced growing hops kind of survive those windstorms better, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
they do. So when we have a variety that makes it to the top and reaches over the top of the trellis, those are far more secure in terms of connecting to the trellis system. And in the past, when we've had rain and wind, then the stress is, if the field gets too heavy, you actually have the poles and the wire coming down.
Yeah.
But with a lot of these newer varieties, they don't want to hit that 20-foot trellis mark, and they're either sliding back down or falling down when we get these wind events. So it's just something that I'm sure we'll learn how to farm and get the vines where we want them to be to reduce some of this impact in the future.
Sure. So not to keep speaking about doom and gloom, but question about, have you ever had a year when smoke actually had an impact on the hop aroma?
None that I'm aware of, no. I'd say that this prevalence of smoke is more recent history in the hop industry. Last year we were very fortunate. We did not really have any periods of prolonged smoke in 2019, but we did in 18 and even 17, and there was a lot of concern about that. And in those years we actually also had, pieces of ash falling on the plants in the field that we could see. So we knew it was out there, but with the hops going through the machine and all of the cleaning processes that take place before they get to the kiln, we believe that most of that ash and dust had been removed, and there wasn't any evidence of it later down the road, either with whole cone or pellets. So that's our expectation right now.
Sure. Yeah, I remember, gosh, it was a couple of years ago. We were out there. There was quite a bit of smoke in the air. But yeah, once brewers were selecting and everything, they weren't noticing any of those smoky undertones or anything. So it seems like, if it's a periodic rain or gets shaked off when, you guys are removing the cones from the vines, that it, kind of takes care of that smoke smell. So
yeah, there's no indication that the plant is absorbing and holding it.
right. So somebody said, thank you for your presentation. And can you tell us more about the method and time frame of analyzing hops after harvesting? Example, harvest alpha versus final alpha value of pelletized hops.
Well, we do monitor that from year to year. And, in addition to the amount of pounds of hops we send in, we do keep track of our fields and how they're performing from one year to the next. Sometimes as fields mature, you'll see some of those numbers begin to decline. That can be an indication of when we might want to consider changing out that rootstock for something younger. A lot of that analysis occurs for us once we deliver the hops to the merchants. They obviously do additional things like checking for residue levels and that sort of thing as well. And that's, again, feedback that we really look at in order to make our decisions for next year.
Sure. Another question, I can probably answer this one, but You mentioned common hops are being distributed through BSG. What other varieties of yours can we get through BSG? Now, I know that this year we are contracted for Cascade, CTZ, Willamette, Centennial, Comet, and Cluster. Um, whether or not we've bought different ones in the past, I don't know offhand. But I definitely know that you can get those varieties through us this year.
Yes, and Amarillo as well.
And Amarillo, that's right. So.
Yeah, I don't think that our, variety mix that has gone to BSG is all that different than it has been the last few years. And, we sure hope to continue to send the same varieties to them in the coming years too.
Yeah, no, we love your hops. They're always good. And, touring your facility and being out in Yakima, I'm really missing it right now. So.
Yes, hopefully we can have you guys here in person next year. We'll have a lot of exciting new facilities to look at then too.
Yep. So, well, that's all I have for questions right now, unless anybody else has anything to add. Oh, we just got another one.
All right.
Regarding the virus affecting Cascade, not the COVID virus, let's just make that clear. What other varieties are affected? Has the spread of the virus been determined, how it spreads and where it has spread? And what are the mitigation efforts to keep it isolated?
That's a great question. So we believe that the virus is prevalent in other varieties, but the other varieties are able to grow through it and not show as much evidence that it exists. And it is something that we have been talking to our researchers about, and they are continuously looking into it and trying to come up with some different treatment methods for us to mitigate the effects of it when it exists. We have tried a few different farming practices in the past, such as hilling, which is where we essentially drive down each row with a tractor and transfer some dirt over the top of shoots at the bottom. And the idea is that then the plant would focus more on the shoots that are already growing up the string so they reach their full potential rather than continuously trying to branch out. And that did help some, but we believe it actually can be transferred from field to field with our equipment. If we send a tractor disc through one field and then it goes to another, it could most likely transfer some of that. If we had an aphid that fed on a plant that was infected and then somehow left the field and went to another field and fed on a plant there, we think that's a potential way that the virus or viroid spreads. So it's something that we still need to learn a lot about. Researchers are spending time at both Washington and Oregon state universities working on this for us, but there hasn't been any clear sign of how we can eradicate it at this point.
Have you tried masks? No.
No. Sanitizer? No.
Yeah. Not good for them. So.
No, but in all seriousness, hopefully we do learn something in the coming years and at a minimum can preserve the fields that are healthy now. And one other thing I'll mention too is that we have seen this most prevalent in the Yakima Valley. I've heard that down in Oregon, this is not as much of a problem, that Oregon Cascade is still doing very well. So I'm not trying to say that you won't find it all of a sudden in the next, growing season or two, but we want to make sure that what is healthy is kept around so that we have time to research further and potentially develop some, more hop fields from these healthy ones if we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all know plenty of beers that involve Cascade hops.
Yes.
So that's one we want to keep around. So that's all I have for questions right now, Jessica. Unless anybody else has one more or two that they want to get in, we're still open. Otherwise, again, I want to thank you for taking the time year after year. You guys always, come through. It's good to see you again. But just wanted to, again, say we appreciate you guys doing this hop report, the crop report every year. So hopefully we'll see you in 2021 in person and not via Zoom. So
yes, and if any other questions come in, just let me know.
Absolutely. And you can send those questions to webinars@bsgcraft.com via email. and we'll either work with Jessica or our staff to get you some answers. And remember, you can watch past webinars by going to the link at the bottom of our registration page, and also register for future webinars on that page. So from everyone here at BSG and Double R Hop Ranches, thanks for tuning in. This is Jessica and I'm Dan, and we wanted to thank you for joining us today. So hopefully we'll see you this Thursday. So thanks again, Jessica.
No problem.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.